Hey, these are your directions for this week in Ms. Lentini's Language Arts class. First of all, you'll want to check the web page that you usually do. You can do that by going to the Harbor team page and finding your Language Arts homework. You should find the plan for today and a link to the entire plan. For today, you want to make sure you check out the link to the entire plan. That should give you a detailed description of what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. I'll be updating this regularly so that you should check back and see what changes have happened. As an overview, you'll notice that we're going to be writing historical fiction narratives. That should be no surprise to you since we've been preparing for this for weeks. Our main overview is that characters fit the theme. So as you're writing this, remember you'll be using very distinct characters that have some connection to immigration, and you'll make sure your story has a clear and meaningful theme. I'll get back to that soon. Here are the key expectations for this writing. You're going to be writing your own immigration narratives. Your story must have a well-developed main character and a theme. Your story should have a clear setting, which may be in the past or present. And there should be some realistic, fact-based details. You can pull those details from your readings, from your social studies class, and from your prior knowledge. Make sure you include at least one scene with dialogue. There'll be a lesson about punctuating dialogue, and that'll be part of your grade. Let's take a look at the rubric together so you know exactly how you're going to get graded when this is finally finished. On the rubric, you'll notice that I have columns for the expectations in the center, beyond expectations, and does not meet expectations. I'm going to take time right now to go over the expectations. You can take time on your own to look at what it means to go beyond. When talking about details, make sure your references are accurate when you include historical detail. This is not your time to write a fantasy story. Your characters should be clear and realistic. Build them so that your audience can appreciate your characters' motivations. Make sure you establish a clear context and setting for your story. I'll talk about context again later on. Setting, you should know, is the time and the place, including what it's like around there. Use enough detail to make it come to life for your reader, but don't put in so much that you have unnecessary details. Be sure to use narrative techniques, things like dialogue, pacing, good descriptions, reflection, anything you can do to develop the experiences and events so that your characters and what's going on with them seem very clear. Use a variety of signal shifts from one time frame or setting to another. We'll go into more detail about that later on. Make sure that you, of course, have a beginning, middle, and end, but make sure that they are logical. They follow from one to the other without any crazy jumps or illogical changes. Stick to a consistent point of view. You're either going to tell this from one character's point of view or from a third-person narration point of view, from outside the story. Whatever you do, don't switch back and forth. Make sure your story has a theme. Remember about theme, that's something meaningful, a message, some piece of truth that your reader leaves with, a truth that goes beyond just the story, but can connect even to your reader's own life or the world around them. As you talk about conventions, make sure you edit carefully. Punctuation should be correct, especially when you're talking about dialogue. I'll have a whole lesson on punctuating dialogue later this week, so make sure that you pay careful attention to that. You want to use language and tone that are appropriate for your audience and your purpose. For now, your audience is your class. Your other classmates will be reading this, and I hope that they will appreciate it. Your purpose is to make sure your theme comes through as you entertain and inform, sticking to the history as closely as you can while being creative within those confines. Make sure your sentences are complete as always, and make sure that you have a variety of sentences in length and structure. Of course, when you're using dialogue, you might vary that and even use incomplete sentences or even dialect to show an accent. But the rest of your narration should be carefully constructed with proper sentences. An option that you have with this after your story is written. Did I say after your story is written? After your story is written, you have the option to turn it into a picture book. Make sure you finish writing your story first before you decide to create a picture book. If you do create a picture book, you may use pictures that you create yourself, or you can use pictures that you find in the public domain on the internet. Remember, you can use historical archives for this, and you can use Creative Commons as long as you check the permissions for those. But again, make sure you finish your writing first. For today, after you look over the rubric, you have a complete understanding of that, or at least as much of an understanding as you can for now. I'd like you to begin planning your story. You can start by planning your plot, but be sure to have an idea for your theme in mind. The first step for you is to create your own somebody wanted but so then plan. You can do this in your writer's notebook as a beginning, but then I'm going to ask you to make sure you link to this form. On this form, it asks you to plan your story and answer these questions. Of course, you're going to put your name. I'm asking you now to select your class period to help me keep track. Who is your somebody? What is the character that you're going to be writing about? Don't just tell the name. Include some details. How old are they? What motivates this character? What kind of concerns does he or she have? What's going on in his or her life? Next, talk about what your character wants. Again, that might be the motivation, but it also should have a connection to what's going on in the story. Does your character want to come to America? Does your character want to be free of persecution? Does your character want to find someone who's missing? Keep in mind, you want to have a theme in the back of your mind, so whatever you decide to happen in your plot should connect to that message you want to get across. You might not have that completely fleshed out at the start, but don't forget to keep it in mind. The next part is the big one. But. I did say but. Now we're wondering, what gets in the way? What makes it hard for your character? What's going to be the big challenge? Is it going to be a challenge that has to do with nature? Challenge that has to do with another human being? Is it a challenge from within? A personal struggle? It's up to you to decide what gets in his or her way. And of course, later on, you'll get to figure out what happens along the way. And there's your so. Because of this challenge, what does your character decide to do? Remember, it should be a decision or a change that the character makes that makes this logical. So here's where your climax will probably come into play. There's a big challenge, and so what does the character do? That's where you're thinking. And of course you want to say how it's going to wrap up. Let's avoid those "and she woke up" kind of endings and have a clear wrap up. You don't have to solve every problem, but you should make it clear how that main but gets figured out, resolved. And that's it. Be sure to keep this button selected at the bottom. Send me a copy of my responses. That way you'll get an email with all of this, so you can use it as your plan for your story when you're writing. If you uncheck that box, you won't get that information, and you might have to reproduce it all by yourself all over again. That would be a bummer, wouldn't it? Here's an example of what I did for my story that I'm working on. I based it a little bit on my grandfather, Grandpa Leo, who came over as a 12-year-old from Russia and Austria. But of course I fictionalized it since I don't have him to interview anymore. This is how it's going to appear to me on a spreadsheet after you answer your questions. So the first part, somebody. Who's your main character? Well, here's what I said about mine. My main character is Leo. He's a 12-year-old boy coming to America from Austria to meet his older brother. He doesn't know any English. His parents sent him over, expecting him to send money for his sisters to join the brothers soon. So you get a little feel about what the challenge is going to be. What does he want? Well, he wants to find his brother and get settled into his new life. But he doesn't know any English, and he worries that his brother won't recognize him since it's been years since they've seen each other. So, as he gets off his ship at Ellis Island, he climbs high up over the docks and waves the quilt that his mother sent him with. I got that quilt idea from one of the books we read last month. He knows his brother would recognize the quilt. Then, that's what happens. The brothers meet, hug, and head off to their new life together. Do you have an idea what my theme might be? I'm still playing with it a little bit, but I know it's going to have to do with some traditions and the connections between brothers and family and the promise of the new world. I'm going to make sure I incorporate some details about what they were pushed away from in Austria. They were escaping pogroms because they were Jewish. And what was bullying them? There was a lot of opportunity for new jobs and wealth and money, and also it was the pulling, that desire to make sure that they can get their mother and their sisters back to or over to America so they could join the brothers. Okay, now it's your turn. Get going. Don't be lazy about this. Don't worry, though, about making it perfect the first time. If you decide to make some changes later on as you're writing your story, that's fine. But I do want you to start thinking about all of these elements so you have a plan in mind as you begin. Tonight, your homework is to complete this chart. You may go on to writing if you'd like to, because eventually you're going to have to write this entire story. Good luck!